that I've had very senior level C-suite person say, I want you to just make them do it. I always pause. I was going to be a failure point, and they did not see any responsibility on their own part to bring people along. They're not 5 years old. This isn't 1940. I truly believe that when you ignite that spark in people to not only do they, why are we doing it, but that they see themselves in the outcome. Somebody that I follow that talks about you should always treat people that you love the way you react to your person coming into the room, the way the dog reacts to you coming in the room, coming home, right? And it's so cool when you think about just pure unconditional love that you get from a pet. That's it. Everybody should try and emulate that.
I think you're right. I love that advice. I think that's great advice 'cause it is so warm and wonderful when you come home and the tails are wagging. Even our cat, we have a mix too. He'll come up when he hears us and he'll kinda see what's going on. He's a little more aloof like a cat, but he'll still be like, "Oh, hey guys."
Right.
And then he comes and he cuddles with you.
That's
Yeah. Oh,
it.
I love that. We have such
They're
a
never on their
wonderful
phone, right? They're never distracted with their toys, right? They're never you are always
You're
the most important. You
well
came home. They're happy to see you. Yeah.
so right. Oh, that is a wonderful perspective. I'm so glad you shared that because that's something I think we can all take to heart. And you have a wonderful heart for
Thank
nurturing
you.
and caring for animals. And I'm sure that translates into teams and caring for people, like that transition of the mindset, like you're talking about. How do you take that and transition that into the workplace when you're managing, engaging, working alongside colleagues and working with teams?
Such a great question. I don't wanna believe that it is a skill that you're either born with or you're not. I do think that people can learn to demonstrate genuine care and, Francis Fry and Ann Morris talk about love for your teams, and I know people get weirded out about that word, but I do think they're absolutely onto something because when you are part of the leadership management track of some sort, and you are responsible for someone else's not just their contributions, but for their professional growth, in some cases for their personal and mental well-being. We've all seen all of the statistics now that talk about the mental impact that a boss has on an employee. And if you take that seriously and you dedicate what skills you bring to the table to make them better, it makes the whole output better. And it is I think it is really an important thing that managers, bosses, leaders of any sort find a way to get to that place where they're on the same side, wanting their team member to succeed, to feel good, to feel empowered, to feel engaged in the work that they're doing. Because when you truly care for another person in the workplace, the output is ridiculously unimaginable as far as how far they can go and that they will grow.
Serena, that's another great perspective. I'm so glad you're sharing this with us because oftentimes I feel like there is I don't know, if it would be called a stigma or just this kind of philosophy of us versus them in the workplace and it's leadership versus everybody else, you know? And to your point, as I think it should be as well, and maybe I'm just biased, but I think it should be us together and all of us working for the outcome that you're mentioning. So, talk to us a little bit about how you got into this wonderful mindset and philosophy of helping people and coaching them to that, because you have a really wonderful, rich background of leadership and coaching.
Thank you so much for asking. I don't know that there was a time, like a watershed event or something that said suddenly made me realize this was the difference. I was 26 years old when I was promoted to manager at Accenture, right? Who on earth puts a 26-year-old in charge of other people? But that was the model at the time. But I do think that I had the opportunity to learn from some tremendously good people managers, and I also had the opportunity to learn what not to do from some people that weren't as good, that they were I truly believe that they were more insecure, perhaps because they were 26 years old when someone said, "Here, you're now responsible for this team of people." Um, I do think that there is for leaders, the experience that I've had is if you're continually growing and you're committed to continually honing your leadership craft, your management of other people's tasks and your leadership of other people's mindset, you are constantly not okay with just being okay, right? That you are continuously improving. That commitment, if you're doing it for yourself, you can see it in other people. And I do think that you're right about the us versus them. I have clients now that I've had more than one, sadly, very senior level C-suite person say, I want you to just make them do it. And whatever the it is, right? Just make them do it. And I always pause, and, lots of times I mean, I have chosen not to work for a couple of leaders who that was exactly what they wanted, and anything less than that, I was gonna be a failure point, and they did not see any responsibility on their own part to bring people along, to help people to see the purpose in what they were trying to get them to do, to help them to understand the why. They don't need to understand the why, they just need to do it. I wanted to say to them, they're not 5 years old. This isn't 1940. People I truly believe that when you ignite that spark in people to not only do they why are we doing it, but that they see themselves in the outcome and they get encouraged and enthusiastic, the leader can sort of step back and just be proud and watch them go. I always say it's guardrails time, right? Once you get them going, then you need the guardrails. You're not mandating anything. You're just guardrailing in case they go a little askew. But it's unbelievably impactful when you can do that with people, and it is unfortunate that the us versus them permeates with, I do believe, people that are insecure in their own position. I've heard people refer to that as lazy leadership. Just tell them what to do. It's lazy. I also think that in some cases, it's a shortcut because they don't know an alternative. They haven't invested in their own leadership development to understand what the other alternatives might be. But when they do, when you have leaders that are about it being a team sport to be successful, it is unbelievably just such a beautiful thing to see that group come to see the fruition of their out. And I that's one of the reasons I have my tagline is turning what if into way to go. So it's those what if wonderings that a leader says, what if we could, and then all of a sudden the team they achieve their outcome, and then it's a way to go celebration.
Oh, I love that too. You said so many wonderful things just now. The one thing I want to highlight and pull out is the idea of guardrails. That's one of my favorite words because, to your point, it really is about setting up that structure so that we can have teams that are creative and innovative. I believe you can't create in chaos. So you need that structure to be free to do what you need to create. At the same time, it can be challenging for folks who are just getting to know this idea. Maybe they're younger too, and they're getting into leadership and they don't even know what is a guardrail or how do I set that up and not appear as a micromanager or someone who is still towing the line of maybe dictator and delegator of tasks versus that support system.
I love that one that's where we'll talk a bit more, and go into deeper because I agree with you. I think that it is hard for a lot of leaders to know that balance between what do I need to tell them versus and the way I always help leaders to address that because inevitably a client will say to me, but how do I get them over that? And I always start with what questions are you asking? You'll know how big a guardrail needs to be if you're asking truly open-ended questions, not "Don't you think that?" Because that's the worst question on the planet, in my opinion. "Don't you think that?" "Oh, don't you think that's the wrong way to do it?" "Well, if I thought it was the wrong way to do it, I'm guessing I wouldn't do it," right? Is the follow-up to that? Um, but when you think about how high does the guardrail need to be, how solid does the guardrail need to be, a lot of that is around the questions. So if a leader does a really good job of painting a vision, helping the team to understand the purpose in the work that they're doing, the outcome that they're doing, that they understand the why, and that they help align an individual's skills, capabilities, in some cases, aspirations to what that purpose is, then the leader mood turns into question asking, right? And making sure that you're asking those good questions that say, do they understand? Are they aligned to what it is that we're doing? Do they feel one empowered, but also that they are supported with the right tools, with the right check-ins, those kinds of things. At that place, those the questions become the guardrails. Because if a leader's asking truly open-ended questions, not leading the witness questions. So, or, and and there has to be a degree of trust, right? You can't ask questions, get answers that you wanted to hear. If the environment is not one that's built on trust, you will get answers that you want to hear because people need their jobs for mortgage and rent and things. Um, but that cycle is there, then the guardrails get created by the questions that you ask and the check-ins that you do. And it's not micromanaging. It truly comes across as supportive. My favorite leading or ending question for anything is, and what help do you need from me? And what support do you need from me? And how can I best help you to achieve that you're talking about? Those kinds of questions where they may not know the answer, and that's a really an important thing. They may say, I don't know. That is a fine thing to say, which is tells the leader that they need a little bit more run room, right? They need to go with it for a little while longer in order to figure out, oh, and now I need help. Let me check in with you on this. And then you'll build that trust up so the guardrails can come lower.
I love that. I love questions. I love the idea of making sure that they are open-ended. Otherwise, to your point, we are leading our team in a way that's trying to lead them to our thinking and not so much having them think for themselves about the decision or the resource you're trying to get to or the support. So I think that's really great advice. And I'm curious because we're talking about these kind of situations just in general in a normal work environment. Now, I will preface that and say um, perhaps there is no normal because change is constant. However, at the same time, we can go through massive amounts of change and restructuring. We could go through different pivots and shifts throughout our work life that we need to navigate in a different way than we are accustomed to. And our leadership needs to be equipped to do that too. And I love talking about change management because the very nature of change is uncertain. So the way to navigate that can be really challenging. You're met with a terrain that you'd not come across before, or it's going to be different. It's not going to be, the map is not the territory. It's not what you expect. And as a leader, that can be very daunting. So long entry segue into this, but for that context and understanding, how do we help our leaders lead through change and lead our teams through change especially when you need to be that support system for them?
I love that we're talking about this because this is exactly what, after 30 years of corporate transformational work, I focused my entire company on 3 years ago. I said, "I want leaders to be better at diagnosing or assessing where they're at from a change trajectory. I want them to be better at figuring out their roadmaps as they go. And I certainly want them to be better at engaging their teams to achieve outcomes that allow them to be doing that." And frankly, it's one of the reasons why I started podcasting, because I wanted to help sort of be more preventative in the disasters. I get called when the change has gone off the rails, when it's most often it's usually stalled, right? Because the team isn't achieving the outcomes at the pace and that the leaders thought would be possible. And it's rarely because they didn't try. It's usually because they didn't understand, or because they've got multiple priorities, or because, those things that are good intentions that went wrong. But I really truly believe that when leaders can take and I say I am an organizational change management person, because there's tons of technology change that you can do and business process, which always fit into any kind of change initiative. There's always a technology or tools that you're supporting. There's always business process, but the people. how people adopt new ways of working, new ways of interacting. That is the decider for whether change is going to succeed or not. And when leaders start to understand that, the very nature, as you said, the very nature of change becomes possible. So I always, and so I am actually helping leaders to, I start with communication all the time. I will say to leaders, how have you communicated this change? Now, inevitably, it's like, well, I told them, or I sent an email, right? I posted it on our intranet, and I've heard all of those, right? And what's interesting is I've said, and what reaction did you get? Oh, well, they'll get it. Their our quarterly goals, that'll be included in our quarterly goals, or it's very clear that the responsibility to communicate the change in a way that people can hear, not just because you said it, becomes a really important lesson and a skill for leaders. I've actually had a couple clients where they brought me in to do essentially a communication strategy for their change because they could see it. The entire C suite see what they needed to deliver 100%. They knew it. They could have written books about what they wanted to do, but they didn't communicate it in a way that this one was a field-based organization. And they sort of forgot about the fact that some of these field-based people didn't have daily access to emails. They weren't computer-based workers. So it's really an important skill for leaders to develop, is that ability to communicate for change, not just assume. And I sometimes will say to leaders, you've done it enough when the mere thought of saying it one more time makes you roll your eyes, right? You're just like, I can't believe I'm gonna have to say this again. When you get to that point, you're at the last time you need to say it, right? Then we can move on to the next topic. But that until you're that point, you're not done.
I my team knows that I sound like a broken record when I say, "I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but we need to," or "This is happening," or XYZ. Yeah, and I love that you start with communication because I truly believe it's at the heart of it, and so many people that I've talked to seem to all be aligned with you on that understanding of communication, but how hard is it for us to effectively communicate? And you raise all those points. Well, I'm curious, what are some of those situations that could have been prevented that you've experienced? No names need to be named, but what are those some of those situations that you've experienced where if we had only communicated more or effectively or across different channels in different ways, we would have been able to prevent this. Have you run into a lot of those types of situations?
I have, and it is unfortunate because it's never intentional, right? And it's never really for lack of good intentions. Oftentimes it is because the organization may be moving at different paces. So I had a client where the entire IT team was working frantically on this list of initiatives. Their application developers were working, and they've got the QA and testers working. And the C-suite, rightly so, went through their strategic planning process at the end of the fall season. And then they were preparing, and they were so excited to kick off the new year and share this strategic plan and what we were going to accomplish in the new year. And the IT team, you could have picked them up off the floor, because this work that they'd been doing, it wasn't that it wasn't aligned, it just that the strategic initiatives were communicated in a way that felt like nothing they had been doing was aligned to anything with the direction that they were going. And so all of a sudden they had this mass decline, right? In everything from engagement to there was some unexpected and unwanted attrition. Not because they weren't working on things that mattered, but because the language had changed, because there wasn't alignment to what they were working. They didn't see the vision. They were working on something that was a small cog, and the strategic initiatives that were rolled out for the year were much bigger. Yeah. If you're talking about something that somebody's working on, the credit card payment process, and we're talking at this point about our next new initiative is going to be about some big new product, they don't see that this credit card thing is imperative there. And I oftentimes say to leaders, if you've got 150 projects on your list and they don't match to the 5 strategic initiatives, you haven't done your work yet. We need to keep going. And I always ask the same questions. Those 5 strategic initiatives, as empowered by what? Like, how do you let's pull those initiatives apart further and further. How do you get to that outcome? What is the key initiative or key project? Sometimes they're not as big as an initiative. Sometimes it's just a project. Sometimes it may not even be that. Same thing, it may be something that you haven't even gotten to and it's an enabler. But those by pulling that down a bit more and making sure that that's aligned, that's the leader's job. Set the vision and then communicate that vision aligned to the work and acknowledge when some of those projects are things that people have been working on that don't necessarily fit in the future, but make that a graceful exit, right? Because people that are working on something that I've had, unfortunately, even during my IBM tenure, there would be people that were working on things that were no longer relevant. Not because for anything that was, important to them, but with the rate of pace of change in the industry, in technology, there are things that they're going to change externally and it's not and that you can't keep up, right? So when the organization is really nimble, you can pivot, but when if you're steeped in something that is a very big, maybe a legacy system, you may not necessarily get there. And I've seen some of that, and I think that when leaders focus on how do we bring people through that, it needs to be an intentional thing. And I think leaders are much happier when they don't feel like they are constantly behind the 8 ball trying to figure, if they're having that concept of setting that vision.
Serena, it feels like as leaders, we have to set our own guardrails in a way with the strategic focus. And in what you're saying, I'm internalizing and translating it and thinking, how can this apply to our own kind of focus? And yeah, it feels very much like, okay, when we are setting that strategic mission and vision and the values, and then we go beyond that and we look at our goals for the year and dive deeper into the quarter, or however we might be setting those up, we are setting up the guardrails for ourselves. And at the same time, to your point, there are going to be external changes and conditions are going to change and affect what we're working on. So it really is a living set of strategic initiatives in my view, and maybe I'm wrong in interpreting this. Um, but it sounds like we as leaders need to set those guardrails, but be asking ourselves the questions of, is this the most important thing to be working on right now? Is this moving the needle forward? Are we as a team aligned on these initiatives? What are your thoughts on that?
I love that. The only thing that I would add was that, your questions, is this tends to be a yes or no answer. I always try and turn this around and say, how is this? How is this serving our outcomes? How is this serving the direction that we think we're going? Because sometimes, to the degree of prioritization or different projects and initiatives, you'll see that it could work. It's just going to be harder. I have this levers of prioritization metric that I use for lots of projects to say, just how hard is this gonna be? How aligned is it to the work we've been doing? How big a change is this to the even in some cases, the nomenclature that we've been using? And when you start to ask how questions as opposed to yes or no questions, it becomes a gradient. And I think when leaders are more open to the idea that it's not black or white, but it's shades of getting to an outcome, it helps you to be able your guardrails are more flexible and you're allowed to you that gives you more flexibility in getting, achieving what you're trying to get to. One thing you said that struck me, you were talking about how, the responsibility of leadership is has never been harder, right? I'm not it's never been harder in any time in history. You've got internal things, you've got external things, plus you have, in some cases, what you think you're supposed to be doing. So you have your inner voices are also adding to that. I always tr- try very hard to help leaders take that one metric beat or pause to say, who else on your team knows more than what you know about this? Because I think so many leaders, certainly leaders that I meet, they think they're supposed to have all the answers, and they don't ask a question they don't know the answer to. And okay, but when leaders, some of the best leaders that I have ever had, I worked with a man at IBM. He was by far the best question asker on the planet. Like, he would ask these questions that would make you go, "Wow," like your brain would just light up and fire. And his big secret was, and he would tell me this, "I don't know the answer. I just know that I'm gonna surround myself with people smarter than me on different topics, and I'm gonna inspire the questions. I'm gonna inspire the answers with questions." And that is such an important characteristic for leaders to come to the table with. They don't have to have all the answers. They have to assemble people that can get to better outcomes. And when they're confident in what the skills they're bringing to the table, they have no issue doing that.
I love that. That's just wonderful insight, Serena. I love that even a simple word change can have a different impact on how we're viewing something too, or how other people are receiving something. Because you were saying earlier as well that we might be communicating our initiatives in a way that isn't received as perhaps intended. Because I want to believe, like you, that we have the best of intentions, or we'll give ourselves and our leadership the benefit of the doubt. They have the best intentions, but we're all human. We're gonna fail. We're gonna miscommunicate. There's a self-awareness that it feels like that we need to be aware of how we are communicating and how people are receiving our communication. And I know that can be really hard. What do you think? Is that one of the hardest challenges, or are there other harder challenges when it comes to navigating change?
I really truly believe that that once you get the communication right in a trusted environment, which they go hand in hand, I think that that is the biggest one. But I also see some leaders essentially overcorrect in that they end up telling everybody everything, or they say, "Well, I'm just gonna tell them, and then they'll know." And I oftentimes I'll coach leaders with, it's not your responsibility to burden your team with things that they can't do anything about. So I'll give you an example, and it was really an unfortunate example. I had a client that was post-merger. They had, once a merger or post-acquisition, sorry. Once an acquisition happens, oftentimes the back office needs to merge. And inevitably, there are going to be so many people in the same, billing, account. Some of the back office things are not oftentimes able to be, you can't handle everybody. And so what they were trying to communicate, and it was a more junior leader that didn't have the support that she needed. What she was trying to communicate was, let's talk about what other skills this acquired company, there were people that had been doing a lot of things. Typically in a smaller company, you might have a title, but you've done a whole lot of things. What she was trying to communicate, and just didn't have the experience to do it well, was to understand what other skills these two individuals had, so that they could look at what else they could be doing to add value to the broader organization. What it came across was, we're going to find out everything you do because you're on the chopping block. And it was so bad because nobody won. There was nobody that came out smelling good. Obviously upset the two long tenured acquired people. The poor woman who communicated it thought she was doing the right thing. She just the only I'll tell you what the answer, but she obviously didn't, right? Because it created a huge explosion right up to the acquiring company, the CEO, the president of the acquired company, and it became this huge mess. And she was terribly upset, as an empathetic human would be. And what was really interesting was, at the end of the day, they got it ironed out, not without hurt feelings, like not without loss of tremendous impact. The piece that was missing was, nobody from a leadership perspective saw what might have happened ahead of this communication and said, let's just draw run it. Let's if the leader said to this, younger manager, let's just dry run the conversation just in case we're not thinking about, or how you're saying it may, because those are sensitive conversations, and if you've got somebody that's more junior, they might not see it. So one of the things that I often say is, having a quick dry run, it gives them a chance to practice it. You get better and saying things the second or third time you've said them. It also helps you opens the aperture for unintended responses or unanticipated responses. You can anticipate what those could be. And it also demonstrates to that young manager, somebody's got my back. I'm not in this alone. The woman, like, she went offline. She didn't want to talk to anybody. She was mortified because what she intended to do landed so poorly, and she didn't feel like she was supported because now we've got the CEO and the president, they're all in everybody. It became this massive mess, and it wasn't necessary. So I do think that sometimes it's that communication aspect that, by supporting others in their communication aspects, is really an important thing that more senior managers or experienced leaders can do. And I actually spend a lot of time with leaders if they've got something that is a really critical change. Let's talk about how we're going to communicate that. Let's dry run it. I ask I ask leaders 3 questions before they send out any communication, and I ask them to do this. I say to them, at the end of this communication, this rollout, whatever it is, it can be any kind of form of articulating something in your head to other people. What do you want them to think as a result of this communication? How do you want them to feel as a result of this communication? And what do you want them to do? And if the answer to any of those, if you don't know the answer to any of those, you need to refine your communication. And if the answer to any of those is anything other than something that will build engagement in the employee that's reading it or hearing it or receiving it, I want you to go back and try it again. And those questions, those think, feel, do, it becomes like the cornerstone of all the communications that really can impact the way change lands and making change easier.
That is such a great structure, Serena. It makes me think of the idea of mind and heart and motivation, and you're
Oh, good.
taking
Yeah.
care of all three of the important aspects. Yeah, I just love that, and you're absolutely right. There's a huge benefit to practicing and rehearsing. I come from a theater and film background, so I like a good rehearsal, and we might do that for ourselves, but how are we empowering our team and supporting them in the rehearsal and practice of, okay, how are we gonna frame this? I like to think of it as, framing, and that might be oversimplifying it, but you have a really great structure there to take it the next step further. So I'm gonna borrow that for sure.
Hap
Because
Borrowing
I like how
brilliantly
you're
is
thinking.
encouraged.
I love it. Thank you. Well, it's a really great holistic approach that brings us to that idea of empathy. We were talking about that a little bit earlier, and just how are we caring for other people, right? And whether it's animals, you can probably hear my dogs in the background. They're, how are we taking care of them? How are we taking care of our people? How are we taking care of ourselves? And the communication is truly at the heart of that. I have one last question, which I feel is important, and I've actually never gotten to this with a guest in terms of change management. But the idea that we're working through something and we're aiming often, I don't want to make a universally untrue statement, but we're often working towards the idea of a lasting change or turning one initiative into maybe something more operational versus a project that comes and goes. And that seems like it could be another area where leaders don't have the knowledge or the know how or the experience to get folks into a rhythm or keep whatever that change is, keep the momentum going of that change. So, what are your thoughts on that? How do you coach people through that idea of lasting change?
You are I
I
so right, and I've had a couple clients where we were doing an initiative. So I have a sort of everything is threes with me, I guess. But the first step is always that building the why, right? Is understanding the purpose and building the why. The second one is empowering, enabling that change to happen, meaning skills, training, that kind of stuff. And lots of times that's where teams stop. And the piece that is the third in the triumvirate that always makes is around sustaining the change. What needs to happen in order for continuously improving metrics, measures, governance, capabilities becoming part of the ecosystem that we are. And that's what you're on here, onto this, right? Is the sustaining the change is about expecting us to be a growing organization. And what will this mean in 6 months? I often say to people that needs to be thought about before you've rolled out the first training class, right? So let's talk about all three of those. What's the why? How are we enabling the change to happen? And then how are we sustaining those behaviors? And some of that is everything down to it's performance evaluation, it's setting goal setting that allows us to do this. So I had a client where we actually rolled out, we defined a new mission, not a new mission, we refined a mission, defined a vision for the first time, set of core values that were just engaging. People were excited about it. And most companies stop then. Okay, we put our mission, vision, and core values on the website and we're hiring to. They actually went the next step that said, as demonstrated by. So our core values, as demonstrated by these actions, as measured by these outcomes. They built it into their performance evaluation process in a supportive way, not in a judgmental way. And when you start to weave that work through the entire ecosystem of the employee experience, it makes it so that continuous improvement is not an afterthought. It's woven in, it's part of who they are in the fabric. I will say that company continues to be one of my favorite to work with because they get it. It's not done. They're never done, right? They're continuously improving from the leaders all the way down to the newest employee that just came on board.
Oh, I love that. I think it's so important having that kind of growth mindset and culture of improvement. And it can be harder for some folks and easier for others to get there depending on how everybody's aligned. But at the same time, regardless, it's very rewarding when you are a part of that environment. And then I feel like you start to see it's not just leadership, but it's everyone supporting each other too. So it trickles down and around to the whole company. Serena, you have just such a wonderful wealth of information and insight and knowledge. And I know that you've got a lot of experience to back that up. W- One bonus question: if you were to share or encourage your 26-year-old self as a new manager, what would you want to tell yourself back then? What would you want her to know as she's just starting out?
I do think that even myself at 26, I think that I thought I was supposed to be all-knowing, and it wasn't really until I m met with leaders that were really, really good leaders, and I saw how they didn't have to know everything, they just had to be they recognized their skills. It took me a little while to feel like I was enough for the things I brought to the table, and that I was enough to engage other people. And then, it's funny because I say all the time, "Oh, there's so many things I'm not good at. Let's talk. Let's get some wine. We'll talk. We'll have." But when leaders get to that place where they're confident in the things they bring to the table, and they're not trying to hide behind, it's really sad. It actually hurts me a little when I see leaders who are determined to be everything, because that means they're really, really insecure of the things that they are good at. And when they can be secure with the things they're good at and secure enough to ask for help, to find help, my 26-year-old self would have tried to learn that sooner. I was probably was a good 5 years before I ran into the first leader that said, "Oh, I don't have to know everything. I just have to know who to know and who to connect with."
There you go. That's great advice. Thank you for
Thank
sharing
you.
that. I hope that inspires and helps encourage others. Everything you have shared has definitely encouraged me and inspired me, Serena. I'm gonna take and borrow from your wisdom. I hope other people will too. And I would love them to be able to get in touch with you to work from you or with you because I know you have so much more to share. So, how would you like people to connect with you?
Probably the easiest is LinkedIn. I am on LinkedIn every day, all the time. Just make sure that you spell it right. It's Sarena. But other than that, there's also Diamond Solution Group LLC.com. You can get onto my website. I am easily accessible. Luckily, with my name, I am Googleable as well. So, but LinkedIn is probably the quickest.
That's great. You got great name for SEO. And to be sure, we will include links to those below. So, listeners, you can click on those links and follow to connect with Serena. Thank you so much for sharing and for just joining us today, Serena. I know that your time is valuable, and so I appreciate you sharing all the value with us today. Thank you so much. And thank you, listeners, to the Bad Bosses Great Leaders podcast. We'll catch you on the next one.